think since I'm about to play Vampire Bloodlines, this is probably a good time to mention my weird love-hate relationship with vampires, like as a genre, or as a trope, or mythological creature, or whatever. I've had this love-hate relationship with them. I can't explain it. Like, there are days where I'm like, I fucking hate vampires. I hate how moody and dark and edgy they are. There are times where I'm like, oh, this is a good vampire adaptation, where I'm like, oh man, I kind of see myself wanting to be a vampire. And then there are others where I'm like, yo, this is scary as shit. Vampires are fucking scary. And it's few and far in between, like most of the time I'm like, fuck vampires, but then like I watch JoJo and I'm like, oh man, vampires are fucking cool. But like you could argue those aren't really vampires, those are more so like mutants that like can alter their body in different ways. But I don't know, at the same time, you kind of have to put like an interesting twist on vampires to make them cool, right? Then again, I love Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer. Or maybe I love that movie for the wrong reasons. I don't know. I mean, I didn't watch that movie going like, I love vampires. I guess I walked out of it being like, such a great fucking idea. Because you don't think... Because it sounds like a fake movie, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, but it's a real movie. And I'm glad it exists. My only problem with the movie was that the vampires were racists. Or the vampires were the Confederates, but Abraham Lincoln wasn't. He was like the cookie cutter Abraham Lincoln, not the real Abraham Lincoln that like didn't like black people. Whoa! Look it up. It's true. He's quoted saying it several times. But he emancipated the slaves for economic gain and leverage during the Civil War, not for human rights reasons. That was just like to him like an unfortunate like compromise he had to make with the plan or whatever. It's not even that like Abraham Lincoln was like pro-slavery. He was just like indifferent to it, and he didn't necessarily care for blacks as like human beings. He was like, yeah, they can be free, just don't like not in my backyard, you know? And I don't think he realized that's like, oh shit, now they're in my backyard. But it was fine because he died shortly thereafter. Racist fuck with his top hat. Anyway, because they put in this like token black character played by Anthony Mackie in the movie, and he's just like, "Hey, we should free slaves. Remember me, your slave friend, who's a slave?" And it's like, "Yeah, my best friend from childhood who's a slave." It's like, do a quick Google search. Abraham Lincoln did not have a quirky little black friend slave who convinced him that slavery was wrong, because it's like, you know what, my friend's black, so therefore I should free the slaves. Yeah, no, none of that. It was all an economic power move. Anyway, great movie. Had vampires in it. But they were kind of like the classic vampires for the most part. The main thing I saw was that I don't think they like introduced garlic or turning into bats and shit like that. They kind of had like super strength, and that's kind of it. They had super strengths. They could turn you into a vampire, and they could the sunlight, of course, and then they could their main thing was silver. Like, you would have to use silver, which I thought was originally werewolves were silver, and then vampires are just stakes to the heart. I guess they truncated the two or some shit like that. So they truncated it, and then there you go. But there was this really sick scene where Abraham Lincoln took like his pocket watch and like wrapped it around his hand like brass knuckles, and just fucking destroyed this vampire's testicles. Very, very funny, very sick, very cool. Example of bad vampires. Bad vampires. I've seen the OG Dracula movie. I wouldn't call that a bad like vampire movie, because that was the blueprint, but I thought it was kind of boring. I don't know, like the dude would just stare at women, and like it was weird. I remember it because like my writing teacher was like, it was so weird because she was like in her 60s or something, and she's just talking. I don't know the actor's name who played the OG Dracula in that movie, but she was like, "Oh, look how seductive his eyes are," and da da da. And I was just like, this like lady is getting turned on by this like old black and white film. And not to disrespect black and white film, but like I was just like, what the hell is happening right now? It was a weird day for sure. I was like happy because like, yeah, we get to watch a movie, but it was weird because like she'd be licking her lips and shit, like her dried, crusty old lady lips, and I was like, oh, this is weird day. Bad vampires. I don't know. Okay, I will say this. When I think of vampires, I immediately kind of wince a little bit. I can't think of like a particular Oh wait, maybe Twilight. See, I'm torn because like, yeah, Twilight vampires were obviously bad, but like at the same time, I watched Twilight 1 and it was kind of lit in a way because people like this is I think this is the part that people don't want to admit because everyone loves to, because one of the funner things to do in like the early 2000s, the mid 2000s was to shit on Twilight as like a franchise and vampires in general and their perception of vampires. Like, yeah, the sparkling vampires kind of stupid, but it's like, whatever. I didn't really care. They needed an excuse. He had to attend school, right? And they needed an excuse for him to attend school with Bella during the day. So there you go, sparkling vampire. It's stupid, but it's like you can't disintegrate just going to school, or else the story can't happen. But anyway, personally, I like the ones like in the mechanic in Skyrim where if you suck enough blood, the sun doesn't bother you as much. Which some vampire purists might be like, no, they gotta disintegrate on contact. It's like, I get it, but I don't know. Anyway, what was I saying? I was saying that, okay, when I wince at Twilight and shit, wincing at vampires, I immediately think of like, not Twilight, but like, oh, my defense of Twilight. I was defending Twilight because of the scene. So I was getting drunk at my friend Desi's house, and we were watching Twilight 1, and there's this really funny scene that I kind of wish was in the trailer, because if I went my whole life never watching Twilight, I never would have encountered the scene. There's a scene where him and his family of vampires use their vampire powers in this like empty field, obviously, so no one can see them. But they start playing baseball, but like vampire baseball, and they do all these like anime jumps and shit and all this acrobatic shit to just play. It was this stupid gag scene, and I thought it was just so fucking awesome. And I was like, I wish the movie was this for the rest of the fucking movie. Just these vampires instead of this like really sad melodrama about these two tweens hooking up. It should have been this sporting anime with vampires. I don't know. Like, imagine like he has to win the big game or some shit, and he's using his vampire powers for this big night game. And I don't know. I think it'd be really, really fucking funny. just the rest of the movie. But I from my understanding of the other movies, they get darker and they don't really have like comedic moments like that. So I guess I don't know. Now, for the example of the vampire that I thought was scary on my tirade about like the vampires I don't like. So the main reason I don't like vampires is like I just always thought they were weak. I can't really explain it. Like I had like the advantages I felt like were heavily outweighed by the disadvantages. You can't go out during the day, which is, you know, might sound nice to a night owl like me, but the like nights just in general feel shorter than days. I don't know. I feel like a lot more just goes on during the day that you're missing out on at night only. And then on top of that, you gotta constantly feed on blood. It's like, oh, well, we constantly need water and shit to survive. It's like, yeah, but like water is in like an easier supply than like O negative blood. You feel me? So you gotta be feasting on a human. And you're still this, and you can't get by as a vampire unless you're a vampire racist. And by vampire racist, I mean like you got to be like a vampire supremacist in a way. You got to be like, oh, we're the apex predator and humans are the cattle. Because if you don't think that way, if you're like a well-to-do vampire who has morals and shit and won't eat babies and shit, you're gonna have a hard time of it because you're like your inner cravings. You're gonna be like, I need blood. You're gonna try and like malnourish yourself like in Tokyo Ghoul, and it's just not gonna work. Because I think if you malnourish yourself as a vampire, the more savage you go. So it's a catch-22 where it's like the more you try to resist, the more savage you're gonna end up, and the more harm you're gonna do. And then when you try to go about it the savage way, oh, and humans are inferior, you're just asking to get hunted down and killed. Because once you're just willy-nilly just going around killing niggas and like tipping cows and Farmer John's farm and all that shit, a vampire hunter's gonna catch on. So the other thing too, vampire hunters. I'm not a big Blade fan. I know a lot of people love Blade. I don't know. I thought he was like 2000s edgy edge, and I wasn't for me. Maybe in the 90s it was for somebody. It wasn't for me. And they're like, oh, he's one of the first black superheroes, and it's like, yeah, but like, I feel like he's not black, and like him being black does not impact his character in any way, to my knowledge. I think he's just black for the sake of he's cool, and him being black looks cool, or whatever. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like the trope of he's the cool black guy. It's so cool and hip that he's black. You know what I mean? But yeah. So an example of vampires that I think were scary, which are far and few in between. There's this movie I've yet to see, and I've seen bits of it, but I was like, it's called 20. Wait, oh fuck, I don't remember the day. It's not 28 Days. This is a zombie movie. Fuck. Hold on, I gotta like pull this up real quick. Vampire. 30 Days of Night. Okay, that was tripping me up. It was the number. So 30 Days of Night was about like it. Like apparently, it's a really sick idea. Like it's a really good idea. So to circumvent the whole vampires not being able to come out during the day thing, it takes place in Alaska in this like remote village where, in real life, there's like some weather event or storm or something, like a tundra thing that like forces it to be night for like a month, and I think it happens like once a year or some shit, or every couple of years. I don't know how it works, but it's the solstice or some shit like that. I don't know. I'm probably way off, but that's the premise of the movie. And so the vampires kind of like, they've made this remote village their hunting grounds for like over the centuries, and what they do is they kind of purge the village, it rebuilds itself, and like there'll be some cover stories like, oh, they all died in the storm or some shit. And so these dudes have to like survive the storm from these vampires. They're not like vampires, like they're like I don't know how to explain it. They're not the prissy like Resident Evil vampires. They're kind of like savage. I don't know how to explain it. They're like dogs, kind of. They like bark and growl and shit, and like like they have a higher intelligence, but they think more like in the sense of like a tribe does. Like they're more like a, how do I explain it? They act like cavemen, kind of. Like they think like, this is how we'll trap them. Then we're gonna go in and we're gonna eat them. That's kind of how they work, like a pack of wolves, kind of. And it was kind of scary because like there'd be snow, it was dark as shit, and these niggas with like blood all over their face would just come out in the dark and just snatch these white people up. It was honestly really good. I was like, oh wow, this is good. These are some scary vampires. Like I'm actually scared. There's some potential here. It's like how I was like, how zombies aren't scary. I used to be one of those people who were like, oh, zombies just inherently are always not scary. Then you watch World War Z, and yeah, World War Z isn't the greatest zombie film of all time, but don't think about being in that scenario, like the 28 Days Later scenario, where like just a drop of zombie juice or zombie sweat will just kill you, right? And they'll be running and at full speed, and they're hyper violent, and they don't get tired. That shit, that's scary. when they're like pumped up dudes on PCP, you know, that's scary. If they're just a bunch of loadout people high on codeine, like the Walking Dead zombies, that's fine. But if they're high on PCP and flipping and running around and doing all this extra shit, it's scary. And that's what the vampires in 30 Days of Night were doing. They were like hopping off rooftops and grabbing people and doing all this crazy shit. Like, I'll never forget this scene. Like, I've rewatched this clip on YouTube a lot of times. I gotta just sit down and watch the movie one day. But, this dude was just chilling in his house. It didn't even have that, like, you know, in most horror movies, they have that setup where, like, you know where the bad guy is in the house, but the character doesn't know. So the tension comes from, like, oh my god, when is the guy gonna get, like, killed by the killer or whatever? So the dude's just chilling, like, in his thing. He's like, honey, what's for dinner? And she's like, I'm cooking up some mac and cheese or whatever the fuck. And then this dude just this built dude just like, not tackles, how do I explain it? He, like just yeets. He yeets into the fucking window. And the dude's just sitting there, like, stunned, like, what the fuck? And the dude just yeets in. The dude's, like, he's not, like, in attack mode, like, the guy. Because he's, like, it's a shock. Like, a dude just going headfirst through a window is shocking. You don't immediately go, oh, I'm in danger. You're like, what the fuck just happened? And so the guy gets up and just starts eating the dude's wife. And the dude's like, oh, hell no. And tries to get the gun. The gun's useless. And then his wife gets dragged under the house in the snow. And it's terrible. And you're like, dude, go back inside. He's like, I'm trying to save my wife. And you're like, oh, man. Like, he didn't have enough time to react. And it's like, how could you react? Completely just like, and again, this is what I mean by them being more savage. That wasn't even necessarily strategic. Like, it's weird because they kind of devolved throughout the film. Like, in the beginning, they were doing smart things, like getting rid of, like, radio contact from the town and blocking all, like, slashing all the tires so no one could drive away. Smart shit like that. But then, like, they start, like, when they stopped planning ahead and they just started acting on their baser instincts, they were doing a lot of stupid shit. Hopping through windows and just outwardly attacking people during the day, quote unquote, because the sun's not out, but you know what I mean. They were getting, like, more and more brazen as the movie went on, and it was crazy. But I was like, yeah, vampires can be scary again. I was like, I kind of want more vampire movies like this where they're scary. I don't know if that Morbius, the Living Vampire movie, is still coming out with my good old boy Jared Leto. But if it is, I hope it's scary. I hope it's not cringe. It's probably going to be cringe. What am I kidding? It's Jared Leto starring in it. And it's part of this quote-unquote Sonyverse, which is where the Venom movie takes place, which was just, oh. Okay, I have a love-hate relationship with the Venom movie. It was funny. Like, not funny, but, like, it was fun. And that it didn't take itself too seriously. Like, it kind of knew it was a comic book movie, but at the same time, it was cringe. It wasn't cringe, it was edgy. I think there's a difference between cringe and edge. I think all edge is cringe, but not all cringe is edge. If that makes sense at all. Like, not everything that qualifies as cringe necessarily is edgy, but I think that all things that are edgy are cringy, like Hot Topic, Vamp Kids, and the Scene crowd. It's weird because, like, as someone who likes the goth aesthetic and, you know, all that shit and metal and skulls and sick shit, you know, but, like, I don't know, like, vampires, like, just innately make me think of cringe. And I don't know. I think the more interesting vampires are the ones who don't dress up all like Van Helsing and are like, yeah, this is obviously what a vampire dresses like. I kind of like the ones who are like modern vampires, like, you know, vampires who wear modern day clothing and shit like that, but they've lived for centuries and they've kind of adapted to everything. Like, that shit I think is interesting. I don't know. I guess that's why I like Dio so much, because that's an example of a vampire that like lived for hundreds of years and like adapted to like the changes in like society. And then there's that movie with Tom Cruise. Yeah, what was that movie called? Now I gotta Google that too. Give me a second. Tom Cruise. Interview with a Vampire. Yeah, it was Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise. I must have watched that movie like 6 times back when I had the movie channel. And it was like about these like 18th century vampires who lived through the ages into modern day. And like Brad Pitt's kind of like, he's lived this tragedy, this like Shakespearean tragedy of a life, and he's like regaling it to this writer who's interviewing him, and he's trying to pass on a life lesson or some shit to the dude. I don't know. He's like, I want to tell my life story or some shit. I don't know. Basically, Tom Cruise stole the show in that movie. I don't 100% remember the movie. It brought up some interesting like vampire ideas, like that the whole thing from the Abraham Lincoln movie where the Confederates were vampires, so they would promote the act of slavery because it was a legal way for them to acquire humans to devour their blood from, which was an interesting idea. And it was in that movie, and you know, Brad Pitt freed his slaves because, you know, at one point he was like, Tom Cruise, this is wrong. Sorry, I got a text. But basically, Tom Cruise is like, "Oh, this is wrong, and you're all free." It was kind of brushed aside because it went from like, yeah, Tom Cruise brought him under his wing, turned him into a vampire. He started grooming him essentially into being like this vampire lord. But he was like, "You're kind of an abusive boyfriend, and I don't want to be like you. I want to be like a nice vampire." Again, that catch-22 of being like someone who craves human flesh, but at the same time you're trying to be an upstanding moral citizen. So that was an interesting concept. The other interesting vampire concept they had was it was creepy, but it was interesting in a way, because it was like, what about children of vampires? Because that's not really something you see in like the vampire medium. That's kind of like a weird taboo that's kind of ignored. Like maybe you'll see it in anime, like some lolly vampire or something, but you rarely see it in like mainstream vampire media, like a kid that turns into a vampire and has to live through the centuries as a kid, as a senior citizen in a children's body. Do they mature like an adult? Do they stuck with the immaturity of a child for the centuries? You know, shit like that. But basically, they went with the route that the girl was aging mentally but not physically. And it was really creepy because what happened was he adopted this little girl in the 1800s who was about to die from, like, I think the plague or some shit, like the bubonic plague. So he was immune because he was a vampire. So he said, I'll make you a vampire and I'm going to adopt you. And it was really wholesome at first, but then like 100 years later, she's like, I want to fuck. Like she went through like vampire puberty or some shit, but she was still like a little girl, like 8 years old. And she's like, Brad Pitt, let's fuck. I'm a woman. Fuck me. And then Brad's like, yikes, no. You're a little girl. And she's like, no, I'm a fucking woman in a little girl's body. Fuck me, Brad. I'm of age. And it's like, no, this is creepy. This was a big mistake. And, you know, before the movie, you know, kind of went even further with the dark implications of that. Oh, I just said the word when he hit the sound effect.
Because of the implication.
So the vampires, so he finds this, like, ancient order of vampires, this like society, and he's like, oh, finally, society of vampires who aren't like abusive boyfriends like Tom Cruise. Let me join them. Maybe we can evolve as a society. And they had like rules and shit. And one of the rules was like, you never turn kids into vampires, and if they are turned, you are to destroy them immediately, because it's like it's a cruel way to live for centuries, to be a kid, an adult stuck in a kid's body. And then there's the moral implications and all the weird shit. And then it's like, you know, pretty makes sense. But, you know, Brad Pitt's formed this kind of father-daughter attachment to this kid vampire daughter. And so he's like, no, I'm not going to kill my daughter. We'll just leave. And he's like, we can't let you do that. Like, we can't have a kid vampire walking around. It's fucked up, bro. And, like, they're pretty dogmatic in this. It's weird because it's like I agreed with the vampires, but at the same time, you're sympathetic to Brad Pitt, you know, because he's like, oh, I saved her. How could I just unsave her? It's fucked up. And then they kill the girl without Tom Cruise without Brad Pitt's approval, and he goes on this like berserker revenge mission where he kills all the head vampires who've been there since like the quote unquote the dawn of time. We've been here since the beginning, or some shit like that. We've lived to see societies rise and fall or whatever. And he's like, great, there's so much knowledge you can gain here or whatever. And also they were supremacists, which was another thing. Tom Cruise was like the I want to be a vampire who's nice, but they were like, oh, humans are inferior, blah 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 kind of thing. So it was inevitable that they were going to clash in that movie. But ultimately the whole movie revolves around Brad Pitt regaling his tales as a vampire and Tom Cruise kind of stealing the show. And the movie ends with like the guy who's being interviewed being like, I know what to learn from this story. And he's like, you finally understood the moral of my story, that being a vampire is a bad thing. And then the guy's like, no, I want to be a vampire, it sounds sick. He just didn't understand the moral to the story. And then Brad Pitt's like, oh no, I failed again. And the guy's like, come on, dude, that's why you told me all this shit, right? To groom me, make me your apprentice. Come on, man. You need a modern day take on the whole shit, man. You and me, man, will rule the centuries and shit. And then Brad Pitt's like, no, leave. And then the movie's about to end, and it has this cliffhanger where where Tom Cruise's vampire character comes out of nowhere, and because you think he's dead, and he comes back and he bites the guy, and he's driving his Volkswagen, which is silly because Tom Cruise is still dressed like an 18th century whatever guy, and he's driving in a Volkswagen listening to the radio, and he's just like, oh yeah, time for the age of Tom Cruise. And it's like, what? Weird movie. One of those weird things Tom Cruise is in, and you're just like, what the hell was this, Tom? Not as bad as like The Last Samurai or some shit, but Tom Cruise is in some weird movies. Not like Collateral. Collateral is one of the greatest movies he was in. But yeah, hopefully this game is something like that. It came out in 2004, so my expectations aren't too high. I'm a little scared that it's going to be cringe. But we can work with cringe. We can work with it. We can make that entertaining, I feel like.